much, Gio, for this great introduction. Now I want to remind you to follow us on our mass media with hashtag engine code 2020. You can also follow me in our social media as Adriana Martin. Now we'll proceed with our next speaker, Keilla Menezes.
A esta hora nos conectamos con Sao Paulo, el dinámico centro financiero de Brasil, una de las ciudades más pobladas del mundo, con varias instituciones culturales y una rica tradición arquitectónica. Desde allí nos acompaña Keilla Menezes, consultora y Google Developer Expert en Angular y tecnologías web. Ella nos enseñará el secreto para darle superpoderes a tus aplicaciones.
Right. Hi, Keilla. Bem-vinda.
Hi, thank you. Obrigada.
How are you today?
I'm very excited. I'm fine. And what about you?
Good, good. Very excited as well to hear your talk. You're gonna talk about superpowers for applications, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Nice to see all the Latam power together in this conference. So welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Just gonna to share my screen. First, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm from Brazil. I'm such part of this big family called Latin America. And I'm so proud to be part of this conference because this is the first Latin American conference with Angular, and that shows the strength and the power of our community. And besides my professional job, like I'm a developer, but as a person, what I'm very curious about is to study things. And we are like, we create things like many tools to solve your problems, and know how to use the tools important, but also why we are using that tool and what the problem that tool needs to solve. And I like to understand how to use the tools, but I'm really curious about what there is behind those tools. I work as a developer and ThoughtWorks. I live in São Paulo. I am Google Developer Expert in Angular in technology, web technologies. And we live in a world that everything is connected. We are like, I'm talking for many people that I don't know and people that don't know me yet, because we have the internet that enables us to change so much experience. And I still feel like very surprised how can you do incredible things with technologies and internet. And we see this bunch of web applications that are used for delivery technology in many areas. And this is most the general popular solutions that we use to solve problems in technology. But web application depends on connectivity. And if you think about all the variables that a web application depends, I think we believe and we agree that the most uncertain and unreliable is the network. So we have this, sometimes when you access our application, we have this loading that is spinning, and it's not necessary that we don't have connectivity, but we can be at, we call this Wi-Fi. So we keep waiting for a signal, keep waiting for the content, and never appears. And the big problem, because we are trying to use an application under this Wi-Fi. It's worse than no connectivity at all. Because when we don't have internet, it's an answer. And this increases the user anxiety, because the user experience is impacted by how your app behaves in all network conditions. And that's the scenario that service workers can help us, because this is a feature that gives to us web developers the control over the network, harder than let the networks controls you. And service work doesn't improve only the user offline experience, but also improve the performance of your online experience. And we have a kind of a group of people. We have the web standard developers that create these incredible patterns and make us not get crazy, because partners is very important to have a consistent way to develop code. We have the browser developers that create these incredible tools that enable us to run our code, very optimized. But we always have people that create web sites, web applications. And service to work is a feature that gives a low-level access for that. Before, just the only people that have this access, it was web standard browsers and browser developers, because they understand that no one than us knows better what an app application needs. And a service worker is a general type of a web worker. A web worker is no JavaScript run one thread, but with a web worker, we can execute some JavaScript code in a separated layer. So this opens for us to execute code that doesn't depend on the user interaction. So you can execute this code without slowing down the page. And the web worker, they don't have access to the DOM. So they use the API called post message to communicate between the window. And the service worker, they is a specific type of web worker, but they do something related to network traffic. So when you have a common request, so the common is the request comes from your application to the network. When you have a service worker, the request goes first to the service worker, and the service worker could, for example, decide if it's gonna to go to the network to get the content or get from the cache. So it plays a proxy role between your application and the network. And this could offer a rich offline, and not only offline, but an online experience under Li-Fi, and gives us like background syncs, push notification, many things that are related to native applications. So it's all these features is related to this code that don't need user interaction, and it can, for example, have full control of the cache. But if you look at the HTTP archive is a website, so we could check the state of the web. It's very cool to see how the usage about many aspects in the web, and they have a specific report about service workers. And less than 1% of the public websites today use service worker. And if you look, it has been about 3 years that we have available this technology. And you can see by the graph that we are growing, but it is still very, very small for the all benefits that service work offers us. And when I started to be interested about this subject, it was November for the last year. And it was not like I go to a and this is why many of the users were like busy people, like very busy people. They spend a lot of time inside airports, and they should And we want the user to be engaged in with our project, with our API, and we enable offline so they can be inside our airplane and use the application. So I didn't, neither me and my team have no knowledge about service work offline application. And we just pick up a tool, Workbox, and yeah, like we understand their basic to make it work, but I didn't understand service work at all. And for me, it gave me a lot of tricks that I was thinking about to share with you, and we can do that incrementally. And after like 5 months, I get obsessed about subject a lot because it was not trivial to use service work. We can get this tool and use it, and I could do that, but I couldn't understand, and I have many problems about that, but I go so deep in the subject, and this is a talk that I really like to do about service worker. I present a podcast. You can check the Real Talk JavaScript about the subject. But let's see behind the scenes how the service worker what's the nature of a service worker. So service worker use the cache API. So the cache API had the proposal to get access the cache on the browser, store things, remove things. So you can use the cache API solely, like a general storage approach, but it's to help service worker to make your application more reliable. And the advantage of this is, as you know, it's the service works run in a separate layer. So we do need to implement the logic of service work inside your app. So you can configure your service work as very similar as you do in a web server. So remember, you define for a specific account, give me this specific file. So it's the basic way you configure your service worker. And you have in your page, you have your manifest, so you have these entries for mapping your assets. And you have, after that, your service worker, like it's just JavaScript code. And after that, we have the app shell. So this app shell is that part of application that doesn't change a lot. So when you cache this value and you can display for users as soon as access your application, you can give it a lot of performatic experience, because you can make it the big problem of having single page applications, the first load very quickly. And after that, we bring the content. And just detail a little bit more the app shell model is the minimal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code that you need to take your application off the ground. So it's the skeleton of the application. So when you cache this, you can give instantaneity, reliability, and a good performance for application. So it's the Y skeleton, and we can handle some HTML, CSS, and you can decrease the minimal, decrease the time that your user waits to see something in the page. And that's the metric called FMP, first meaningful paint. It's an important metric to measure performance. And this is very common for us that create single page application, because this is the idea of the architecture the single page application follows, this shell architecture. So includes everything you need to run a single page application. Okay, you load that in your page, and for a specific route, you go to the network and update your application. So the idea of using the app shell model is directly related to instantaneity, because this is not only associated to how fast you can load a page, but also the earliest feedback a user can receive. And that's the way you give a superpower for application. Because you can say, no, I can do some cache the browsers, but you still need to go to the server to get this information, right? So what is the fastest request that we can make? That one that you don't need to make, right? And using this feature, service work, you can give it this readability, this is very common for native application, because when you have a native web application in your mobile phone and you click on it, you don't expect it that if you don't have connectivity, the application wasn't going to work, right? Launch. And we can, you don't need to do this like everything in the first moment, but we can use tools, for example, Lighthouse, to have some metrics and try to improve little by little, and like guide you this journey to have a web application and with a progressive web application. But when not to use, I think the most case is when your app server has such complex rules. There's gonna be complex also to configure service work rules. But it, like I said before, it's not trivial to use service work, and I think that's the reason that less than 1% the sites use service work today, because they gives to us developers the superpower and access to low-level APIs, and it has a lot of gotchas and edge cases, and just tell about this famous quote from Uncle Ben: "With great power, there must also come great responsibility." And I don't recommend anyone trying to use the service worker without any tool, because it's very important to have integrated tools with your building process, because these implementation details that could be hard to implement. So there's tools that you can use in your Angular application. One of them is Angular PWA that Angular delivers out of the box. And if you're using Angular CLI in an application, you have this SW update service. So, for example, one thing, a nightmare, is when you have to update your service work. That could be very helpful for don't deliver stale content to your users. And you can configure a bunch of cache strategies. But if you need more complex and strategies and more advanced use of your service worker, I recommend using Workbox. It's a high level service worker toolkit, and they provide a production ready set of libraries. So for two things: to manage code for your service worker, and also for the build process integration, and you can configure more cache strategies. And this, independently of the tools that you choose, it's important that what the level of configuration you need, of the flexibility you need, where the tool is, your team is more comfortable, because we are worry most of the time with the user experience, but it's also important to us to be worried about the developer experience, the people that don't use their application, but those that create applications. But the challenge, like I said, is having your application updated. I don't know if you already noticed about, for example, PWA as Google Chat that showed this pop-up and a new version is available. Why this happened? It's a PWA. And this is very related to the life cycle of your service worker. So service worker are driven by events, and it has a life cycle completely separated for your app page. So as soon as the service worker is registered, it start a stalling process. So if all the caches assets are successful done, so the service work is installed. Once it's installed, and it's starting the next step, which is activating. And after that, if there is no page, because you can have multiple tabs, you can have multiple windows, and does the browser need to make sure that you have just one version of your website running at the same time. And if you have all the pages controlled by the same service work, it goes to the activate step. And then there could be two options. There could be still listen to the fetch events, listen to the halt events, and return some cache. Or if you don't listen to any fetch events, just terminate it. To register your service work, you just need to put the description. So it's going to check if the browser, most of the browsers today, the modern browser supports service worker like Chrome, Edge, Opera, Chrome based, and Firefox. And we listen the event load, not to slow down your page, and you register is just a file, a JavaScript file with the service work rules. And this is the how to, when you put your service worker, define the scope of service work. In that case, the service work is on the root, so has scope is globally. If you put, for example, sides slash my folder slash service work, the scope is gonna be only my folder. And we can check under the application tab in the developer tools, the ID, in the besides the status, you can see the ID, and the ID is changed every time you have a new service worker. And you can check also in the application tab the cache storage values, and you can click on the key values in the cache and see the content of a specific file. And if you configure using these tools, like I said, Angular PWA or Workbox, you have a very high level to define this, what is the route that you want to listen to and return the value from the cache. But for example, using Workbox, you can define more actions that you wanted to perform if you wanted to have this more low level access, for example, to the fetch event. It's possible. And that's the way that is the way they use it. For example, on a more high level structure, just register a route and just say the destination style. So that means you're gonna to cache your CSS. And using here the strategy called stay while invalidate. What it does is it gets to the cache, but goes to the network and gets the fresh content and update to make sure for the next time your cache is updated. And how can I update? How works the update from a service worker? So a service worker could have the information about this actual model, the routes map some event, and how it can could be the name of the file, and you have like a name with a hash, for example, that you enabled to have always a way to know if you have a new bundle, right? And if you change a bit on application, you have in that case a new service worker file. Because if you change the hash, it's going to change the file for service worker, so then it's a new service worker. So that case, the browser is going to download, okay, it's a new service worker. And then if we have an old service worker in the page, what happens? The new service worker enters what we call the waiting phase step. So if you have multiple tabs, multiple windows running your application, you can explicitly call a method called skip waiting. You have to make sure that doesn't want to break your application. But if it don't do that, you only activate your new service worker after all pages, all tabs are closed, and we kill the old service worker, and then the new service worker takes control of the page, and because it started the activating step. And this is a very common approach for, this is the moment that you use to offer to the user this way to refresh, because the service worker is there, is downloaded, but it don't have control until the next reload. And to force our user to have the most fresh content. That's the reason PWAs have this pop-up to ask to the user to reload the page. That's the only way to a service worker takes control of the page. And for example, if you use a workbox, you work, like I said, the service worker, they don't have access to the context of the window. So, but Workbox offer a library, a package called Workbox window. What is this? It gives access to the DOM and enables, for example, to some action. For example, the cache has updated. I can say that a new version of your service work is available, and I can offer this refresh modal. And why service work is such a complex life cycle? Because this is the only way to make offline first possible. And this is the idea to avoid disrupting the current one. Because a service worker has a scope, and you have to make sure this is controlled by the same service worker. And we need to ensure there's only one version of your site running at once. And this is the most important reason, because we are accessing the cache. Imagine if you have two versions of application that has different strategies, and we can lose data, for example. But before thinking about to caching and start to make your application reliable, you have to understand how your application loads, know what you load and when you load. And to define an offline strategy, a way to do that is just looking inside in the developer tools. If you inspect, you're gonna to see how all the files, all the assets they are loaded. And you can see you say a name, right? You can have a type, you have an extension. CSS is a style, HTML is a document, and always start with the document. And in the column waterfall, you see that it takes at the time to load the document, because based on the document references, there's going to load images, CSS, and everything goes down as a waterfall. And if you have, sometimes for the next assets, you can have a overlaps, because you can't, the browser can't download at the same time except the document. So, and another thing is important is because we're dealing with cache, and there's this quote I understand a lot and start to use in service work, because for me, like, makes a lot of sense. There are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and name things. And I think name thing is easy. And it's very important to have your server configuration. It's very common that all the rules in server configuration, it's very common that us developers, we have total control of the request headers, because in the application, you go there, you configure, and sometimes it's very good to us also have control of the response headers that lives in our configuration, server configuration, for example, Nginx or another server. And the rule is, in general, stick with the defaults in the request header, because most of the time the browser helps us in this job. And remember to give it long-lived caching for version nowhere else. If you're using your service worker, there is the caching these is assets. But if you only have this cached in a web server, it has a fingerprint, right? We can do that, for example, putting the Webpack to generate a hash based on the content on your file. So it can give the maximum value. So just gonna to request this file after 1 year. But pay attention when we don't have unversioned files, and we cannot put fingerprint in all files. For example, cannot put that in HTML files, right? So that case, pay attention if you're not caching this file in your server configuration, because you can have stale content in application. In my case, I would using, like I said, Workbox, but I use it with a plugin, Webpack plugin, because it's very important to integrate with your build process. It generates, every time I generate a new bundle, automatically go to my service work file and use it to inject manifest. I could make sure that every time I have a new version of application, I have a new version of my service worker. So, but I think it's important, and it was my first mistake, it's remember to remove your service work file itself from your cache configuration. Because I was caching some JavaScript files, but I use like wildcard, and the service work is a JavaScript file. So even if I had that time a new service work version, I was like, why it's not updating or it's not get the service work version. So remember to exclude your service work file for the cache configuration. And the cache keys, if you use some tools like Workbox does that, it's very important to have unique keys. The Workbox using a very common strategy that is get the name itself of the file and put as a key. And for example, you can, in my case, I use it offline first. I need to be offline first. So you can pre-cache those app, remember that about the app shell model, these app shell files. So my index, my CSS, so I could deliver this offline first experience. And that way I did a pre-cache. So I put it signed. This is the service worker file. So it uses this variable self-w manifest. So it's gonna to get the manifest generated by Webpack and insert dynamically inside my service worker. And was this pre-cache, like I said, is this app shell model. So you have this URL. So I'm mapping what is the file for each assets I using to get everything that I need to get my application off the ground, even if it's offline. And a very important thing that I wanted to share with you, the last thing, is the cache control header on a given response is effectively ignored when caching data. There are no automatic built-in expiration or freshness checks. And once you store item in the cache, it will persist until your code explicitly removes it. So it's very important because you're using service worker, you cache things in, you go to your, like I did, in my server configuration, I update the rules, and I was, let's not clean my cache. My user still sees stale content. So you have to do this explicit. So it's very important. For example, you can define in the case I'm using Workbox to register route, but I define some maximum entries that I'm going to my cache and the expiration policy. Because if you not do that, it's going to be in your cache forever. So some best practices is after you go to application, understand when things are loaded. So you define a strategy for each type of request. Don't put a general strategy for everyone, and understand what makes sense to cache. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to cache everything. And a strategy, performatic strategy, is the stale while validate. That one that I said that gets from the cache, but in the same time go to the network, get the new version, and cache for the next interaction, gives the most fresh content. And also define like the strategy, the number of assets, expiration policy in your cache. And if you want to learn a little bit more, if you're new of PWAs and offlines, I would recommend go to the Code Lives. It's a very good way to get in touch with create a service work from scratch. If you're gonna to do that, but to understand how and why we're doing those things. And the theory, I think Google has a very good content about service work and networking ability and this offline cookbook. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, for being here with me. I'm Keilla, and I'm in Twitter if you're going to follow me, ask questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keila. Obrigado. That was a great talk.
Welcome.
So thank you very much. Please keep